I didn't think much of it when I swiped right on Jake. His profile was the usual mix of gym selfies and vague travel shots, but there was something about his smile that felt genuine. We chatted for a couple of days before deciding to meet up. He suggested a little Italian restaurant downtown, the kind with dim lighting and checkered tablecloths that made you feel like you'd stepped into a scene from a movie. I arrived a bit early, nerves fluttering in my stomach. The restaurant was cozy, filled with the comforting aroma of garlic and fresh bread. I sat at a small table by the window, watching people walk by, trying to shake off the anxious energy that came with first dates. When Jake finally arrived, he looked even better in person, tall, with dark hair and an easy smile that put me at ease. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, and soon we were deep in conversation, laughing over shared stories about our childhoods. But as the evening wore on, I noticed some little quirks that made me raise an eyebrow. For one, Jake seemed overly interested in my family dynamics. It started innocently enough with questions about my parents and siblings, but it quickly escalated into him asking about my childhood friends, where they lived, and if I still saw them. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe he was just trying to get to know me better. But there was a certain intensity in his eyes that made my skin crawl. After dinner, he suggested we take a walk along the river, which sounded nice. The night air was cool and refreshing, and the city lights reflected off the water, creating a picturesque scene. But the conversation took a turn when he started talking about his job. He worked in data analysis, but he mentioned something about tracking patterns in behavior. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't smile back. I mean it, he said, his expression suddenly serious. People are predictable. You'd be surprised how easy it is to figure someone out if you pay attention. Okay, maybe he was a little quirky, but I dismissed it, chalking it up to his passion for his job. We walked in silence for a moment, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up like I was being watched. I glanced around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just couples holding hands and the occasional jogger passing by. As we continued walking, I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but Jake seemed fixated on me, his questions becoming increasingly personal. He asked about my biggest fears, my regrets, and even how I felt about death. I laughed, nervously trying to deflect, but he just leaned in closer, his eyes boring into mine. Seriously, don't you ever think about it? Like, what if you were the last person left on Earth? What would you do? I felt uneasy, the kind of discomfort that knotted my stomach, but I didn't want to come off as rude. I shrugged. I guess I'd try to survive, maybe build a fort or something. He chuckled, but then his face turned serious again. But what if you couldn't survive? What if you were just gone? That's when I decided I had enough of this conversation. I told him I needed to head home, and he seemed to take it well, but there was this flicker of something in his eyes, a flash of disappointment or anger. I couldn't quite tell. The walk back to my car felt longer than it should have. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me, but he walked a few paces behind, still talking and laughing, oblivious to my growing discomfort. When we reached the parking lot, I felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. "Hey, can I walk you to your car?" he asked, and I hesitated. It's okay. It's right there," I replied, pointing to my little sedan a few feet away. He stepped closer, and for a moment, I was struck by how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Come on, it's dark out here. I'd feel better if you weren't alone." Against my better judgment, I obliged. We walked toward my car, and I fumbled with my keys, feeling the weight of his presence beside me. Something about him felt off, like a switch had flipped from charming to predatory. Just as I reached my car, he casually leaned against the door, blocking my way. A chill ran down my spine. "You know, I really enjoyed tonight. I feel like we have a connection." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it was nice." "Nice enough for a second date?" he asked, and I could see that desperation in his eyes. It was unsettling. "Sure, I think you're great, but..." I started, but he cut me off. "But what?" His voice was low now, almost a whisper. You think I'm too intense? You don't know the half of it. You have no idea who I really am. I took a step back, realizing how trapped I felt, the weight of his body leaning against my car suffocating. Look, I think I should head home now. His smile disappeared, and the shift in his demeanor was instant. You're not scared of me, are you? I let out a nervous laugh, trying to lighten the mood, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. No, not at all. Just tired. Good, he said, straightening up. Because you shouldn't be. You'd be surprised at how easily I can find you. My heart raced as I finally managed to unlock my car door, slipping inside and locking it behind me. I watched him through the window as he stepped back, his smile returning, but now it felt like a mask hiding something sinister. Have a good night, he said, waving casually as if we hadn't just had a conversation that made my skin crawl. I barely managed to nod and started the engine, my hands shaking as I drove away, not daring to look back. The whole way home, I replayed every moment in my mind, the way his eyes had glinted in the dark, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I didn't sleep that night, convinced I could hear him outside, waiting, watching, and even now, weeks later, I still look over my shoulder whenever I'm out alone, the memory of that night haunting me like a shadow I can't shake off. I had this feeling in my gut the moment I saw him, like I'd stumbled into the wrong movie theater and couldn't find the exit. We met through a dating app, which in hindsight was probably my first mistake. His profile was charming enough, smart, funny, with just the right amount of mystery, but when I walked into the cafe and spotted him sitting there, something felt off. He was wearing a dark hoodie that seemed a size too big, and his eyes were too intense, like he was sizing me up like a piece of meat instead of a potential date. But hey, I'd already committed to this, so I pushed the feeling aside and sauntered over. Hey, I'm Kelly, I said, forcing what I hoped was a friendly smile. He looked up, and for a moment I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Was it excitement or something darker? I couldn't quite tell. Nice to meet you, he replied, his voice low and gravelly, the kind of voice that might belong to a guy who spends too much time in bars or dark corners. We started with small talk, the usual stuff about work and hobbies. He worked in IT, which was kind of cool, but he didn't seem to have much of a life outside of it. Every question I asked about his interests was met with vague answers, like he was holding back. It was weird, but I figured maybe he was just shy. I told myself I could be patient. I was really just there for a fun evening, right? But then he started telling me about his childhood. And I swear to you, the vibe shifted dramatically. I grew up in a really rough neighborhood, he said, leaning in closer, and his voice dropped even lower as if he was sharing some deep, dark secret. A lot of my friends ended up in jail or worse. You know how it is. I nodded, trying to relate, but I was starting to feel like I was in a horror movie where the protagonist ignores all the red flags. After a while, I suggested we grab some food. There's a great taco place just a few blocks away, I said, hoping to change the subject to something lighter. He agreed, but as we left the cafe, I noticed he was watching the people around us too closely, like a hawk tracking its prey. The taco place was bustling, filled with laughter and the smell of sizzling meat, but the tension between us felt palpable. He ordered for both of us. Trust me, you'll love it, and I didn't really know how to respond. I'd never been one to let someone else dictate my food choices, but I figured I'd roll with it. As we sat down with our trays overflowing with food, he suddenly asked, "What would you do if you could get away with anything?" The question caught me off guard. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. I don't know, maybe steal a yacht or something? He didn't laugh. His expression was serious, almost contemplative. No, I mean really. Like, if there were no consequences, what would you do? I could feel my pulse quickening. I guess I'd probably just travel the world. I mean, that's not really a crime. He leaned back in his chair, a strange smile creeping across his face. "You're not thinking big enough." I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself he was just being edgy or trying to impress me. After we finished eating, he suggested we take a walk. "There's a park nearby where we can talk more," he said, and honestly, I just wanted to get out of there. The food had been great, but the tension had been unbearable. So we walked, and I tried to steer the conversation back to more neutral ground, but he kept circling back to darker topics. I think the world is a messed up place," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "People are all fake, pretending to be something they're not." I chuckled, trying to keep it light, but he wasn't having it. "I mean it. People wear masks, and sometimes I wonder what would happen if we could take them off." By the time we reached the park, I was feeling more than a little uncomfortable. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch ominously across the path. There were only a few other people around, but it felt eerily quiet. He sat down on a bench, and I followed, keeping a safe distance. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked, looking up at the sky. I shrugged, not really sure where he was going with this. "I think everything happens for a reason," he continued, his voice dripping with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "And sometimes those reasons can be dark." At this point, I was seriously reconsidering my life choices. I shot him a glance, trying to gauge if he was serious or just messing with me. But he didn't look like he was joking. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. "I mean, sometimes people deserve what they get. You've seen the news, right? Terrible things happen to terrible people." My heart was racing, and I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. He was talking about violence, about retribution, and I didn't know how to react. I stood up abruptly, needing to create some distance. "I think I should head home," I said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Wait, don't go yet. We were just getting to the good part." His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. I yanked my arm away and started walking faster, my mind racing with how to get out of this situation. I could hear him following behind me, his footsteps echoing in the empty park. "Kelly, come on. Don't be like that," he called after me, but I was done playing games. I picked up the pace, my heart pounding as I ducked into a nearby alley, hoping to lose him. I could hear him calling my name, the sound trailing off as I sprinted toward the main street. I turned the corner, darting into a crowd of people, desperately looking for anyone who might help me. I didn't look back. I just kept moving, my breath coming in gasps until I finally made it to a bus stop. I waited, my hands shaking, half expecting him to appear at any moment. But the bus came, and I jumped on without checking if he was behind me. As the doors closed, I sank into my seat, my heart still racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me. But there was nothing, just the blur of city lights as we drove away. I didn't stop shaking until I got home. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. The date had started out so normal, but it had turned into a nightmare I couldn't shake off. I learned a few things that night. Sometimes a charming smile hides something far darker, and trust your instincts, because sometimes they're all you've got. There's something about a first date that can make the mundane feel thrilling, but my first date with Mark was the kind of thrilling that turns your stomach and makes you question every life choice you've ever made. I met him on a dating app, and we hit it off over a shared love for horror movies and spicy food. So, when he suggested we try this new Thai place downtown, I was all in. Little did I know that spicy would take on a whole new meaning that night. I arrived at the restaurant a little early, excitement bubbling in my stomach. The place was cozy, with dim lighting and dark wooden accents, a perfect ambience for a date. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the nervous butterflies when Mark walked in. He had this wild, untamed hair and a crooked smile that instantly made me feel at ease. We chatted about our favorite horror flicks, and I felt like I had known him forever. It was going well, or so I thought. Halfway through our meal, he suggested we order something really spicy. I hesitated, but he insisted that I wasn't truly embracing Thai food unless I tried the ghost pepper curry. The name alone sent a shiver down my spine, but I shrugged it off, wanting to impress him. I could handle heat, right? Wrong. When the dish arrived, it looked harmless enough, bright orange and fragrant, but the moment I took a bite, I felt like I had swallowed fire. My eyes watered, and I could barely choke down the food, but I forced a smile and tried to play it cool. Mark laughed, clearly enjoying my suffering. Just a little more, he urged, pushing the bowl closer to me. I could see his eyes glinting with something that made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as playful banter. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that his laughter was a bit too enthusiastic, like he was reveling in my discomfort. After a few more bites, I was sweating and gasping for air. I excused myself to the bathroom, hoping to splash some cool water on my face. As I stood at the sink, staring at my red, puffy face, I thought about how the date had taken a weird turn. When I returned, Mark was still at the table, but he had changed. His smile had shifted to something more intense, more predatory. He leaned in closer, and I could smell something off about him, like burnt rubber mixed with something sweet. "Let's get out of here," he said suddenly, his voice low and conspiratorial. I was taken aback. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to suppress the growing unease in my stomach. "Trust me," he said, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. I figured it was just an impulsive decision, and maybe he was just trying to keep the night exciting. We walked outside, and he led me down a side street, away from the crowded downtown area. The streetlights flickered and seemed to dim the further we went, the shadows stretching ominously. My heart raced for reasons I couldn't quite pinpoint. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked again, my voice a bit shaky now. "There's a place I want to show you," he said, glancing back at me with that same strange smile. I followed him down a narrow alley that smelled of garbage and something else, something metallic. It felt like it was closing in on me, the walls seeming to creep closer with each step. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't just bail on a date. I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid, so I kept walking even as my heart pounded in my chest. Finally, we stopped in front of an old, rundown building. The windows were boarded up, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. "This is it," he said, eyes gleaming with excitement. "What? No way, we're not going in there," I said, my voice firm now. "Why not?" he challenged, a smirk dancing on his lips. "It'll be fun. Just a quick look around." I hesitated, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, but somehow I found myself being pulled into the darkness of the building. The air was stale and thick, and I could hear the sound of something scuttling in the corners. My heart was in my throat as we made our way through the dilapidated hallway, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath our feet. "See, isn't this cool?" he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. I could only nod, feeling more trapped with each passing moment. We reached a room at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. I caught a glimpse of something on the floor, a dark stain that looked suspiciously like dried blood. My stomach lurched. "Let's check it out," he said, pushing the door open wider. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to run, but Mark stepped inside, and I felt a strange compulsion to follow. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center was a table covered in old newspapers, and surrounding it were odd trinkets and what looked like jars filled with strange substances. I felt my mouth go dry as I stepped closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Isn't it fascinating?" he said, his voice low and almost reverent. People leave behind so much. You wouldn't believe the stories these things could tell. I was about to respond when I heard a scuffling noise from behind me. My heart raced as I turned, but it was just a rat darting across the floor. I forced a laugh, trying to ease the tension, but when I turned back to Mark, he wasn't smiling anymore. He was just staring at me, eyes dark and unblinking. "Do you believe in the supernatural?" he asked, his tone dropping to a whisper. Not really," I stammered, backing up a step. "You should," he said, his voice low and chilling. "Because I do." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, and I jumped, adrenaline surging through me. "What was that?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Mark didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me intently, an unsettling mix of excitement and something darker flickering in his gaze. "We should go," I said, turning to leave, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "No, not yet. We're just getting started." My heart raced as I pushed past him, bolting for the door. I could hear him calling after me, the sound of his footsteps echoing behind me, but I didn't look back. I fled down the hallway, the weight of his presence pressing down on my back like a predator stalking its prey. I burst out of the building, gasping for air as I stumbled into the cool night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with my keys as I tried to unlock the door. I glanced back, half expecting to see him standing in the shadows, but there was nothing, just the stillness of the night and the distant murmur of the city. I drove away, heart pounding, replaying everything in my mind. I didn't know what I had just experienced, but I knew one thing for sure. Some dates were just better left unmade. It was one of those nights that felt too hot for September, the kind where the air clings to your skin like a wet blanket. I was nervous, which was a given, but I was also excited. I mean, who wouldn't be? I had been chatting with Alex for weeks on this dating app, and he seemed perfect, charming, funny, and the kind of guy who could make even the most mundane topic sound interesting. We decided to meet at this little dive bar that was a few blocks from my place. The kind of place that had cheap beer and dim lighting, where you could have a conversation without worrying about being overheard. I got there first, and the bar was almost empty, just a couple of people nursing their drinks at the far end. I ordered a beer and took a seat at a small table in the corner, trying to play it cool. After about 15 minutes, I felt my stomach flutter when I saw Alex walk in. He looked just like his pictures, tall, with messy hair and a smile that lit up his face. I waved him over, and as he approached, I felt a rush of adrenaline. We started chatting, and at first, everything flowed easily. We laughed about our mutual awkwardness and shared some of our cringiest first date stories. I was genuinely having a good time until he mentioned something that made the atmosphere shift a bit. It was casual. He was talking about his job, how he worked in forensics. "At least I'm not the one in the body bag," he joked. I chuckled nervously, unsure if he was serious. But then he went on to describe a particularly gruesome case he had worked on. I could see the fascination in his eyes, but it made my stomach drop. The details were so vivid, I could almost picture the scene he was describing. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but he seemed to enjoy this darker side of himself far too much. As the night went on, I found myself sipping my beer more often, hoping it would ease the growing discomfort settling in my chest. He continued with his stories, and I began to notice the way his eyes lit up when he talked about death and decay. It was unsettling in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. He spoke about the human body like it was a puzzle to be solved, and I felt more like a spectator than a participant in our conversation. "Do you ever think about what happens to people after they die?" he asked, leaning in closer, his breath hot against my face. I laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "Not really, I guess. I try not to think about death too much. But he didn't let it go. He launched into a detailed description of decomposition, how the body breaks down the stages of decay. I could feel my skin crawling, and I wondered if I should make an excuse to leave. But then I thought maybe this was just his way of trying to impress me. After a couple more beers, I decided to lighten the mood. Okay, let's talk about something else. What's your favorite movie? I asked, hoping for a change of pace. He paused for a moment, his expression shifting to something more serious. I really like horror movies, especially the ones based on real-life events. Oh, come on, I chuckled, trying to hide my discomfort. Not everyone can handle those. He just smiled, his eyes glinting with an intensity that made me shift in my seat. You'd be surprised, he said, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I was starting to regret not having chosen a different place to meet. My mind raced with excuses to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. As we finished our drinks, I noticed the bar was nearly empty now, just a few lonely souls scattered around. It was getting late, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, he suggested we go for a walk. There's a park nearby, he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. I hesitated. My gut was screaming at me to decline, but I didn't want to be the girl who ran away from a little adventure. So I agreed, and we stepped out into the humid night. The park was dark, illuminated only by the occasional flickering streetlight. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as we walked along the path. The trees loomed over us, their leaves rustling in the breeze like whispers. Alex didn't seem to notice. He was too busy talking about the beauty of the macabre, as he put it. I was trying to keep pace with him, but my heart was racing, and every instinct was telling me to turn back. I finally mustered the courage to ask him about his past. So, what got you into forensics? I ventured, hoping to uncover a lighter side to his obsession. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his eyes glinting in the dark like shards of glass. You could say I've always had a fascination with death, he said, his voice lowering to a whisper. It's the one thing we all have in common, right? I laughed nervously, but it didn't quite come out right. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, and that's when I noticed something glinting in his hand. It was a small silver object, like a knife. My heart dropped. What are you doing? I stammered, backing away instinctively. He just shrugged, a nonchalant smile on his face. Just a little something I carry for protection. You never know what kind of people are out at night. I felt my pulse quicken as panic set in. I didn't want to seem scared, but I was terrified. Maybe we should head back, I suggested, my voice shaking. But he didn't move. He stood there, that unsettling smile still plastered on his face, almost like he was waiting for something. Finally, I turned and started walking back toward the entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear him following me, but didn't dare glance back. The streetlights flickered and shadows danced around me, and I wondered if I'd make it back to my apartment without incident. I could hear him muttering something under his breath, but it was too quiet for me to catch the words. When we reached the edge of the park, I turned to him, the adrenaline coursing through me. Thanks for the night, but I think I need to go home now. I didn't wait for a response. I just walked away as quickly as I could, my feet pounding against the pavement. I could hear him call out, but I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was safely inside my apartment, locking the door behind me. I leaned against it, breathing hard, the sound of my heart echoing in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone very, very wrong. I didn't know if I'd ever meet someone online again. But for now, I was just grateful to be alone in the safety of my own home, far away from the darkness of that park and the unsettling gaze of Alex. So, there I was, sitting at a bar on a Friday night, trying to ignore the fact that my drink was turning into a sad little puddle of melted ice, when I spotted him across the room. It was my first date with Mark, a guy I met on an app that had just enough quirky bios and bad pickup lines to keep me hopeful. He looked cute in his profile pic, dark hair, bright smile, and just the right amount of scruff, and he had a way of texting that made me laugh. But when he walked in, it felt like I'd been hit with a ton of bricks. Mark was much taller than I expected, his broad shoulders filling the doorway like some kind of grim bouncer. He wore a leather jacket that didn't seem to fit the vibe of the place, which was a cozy little spot known for its craft cocktails and warm atmosphere. But whatever I thought, maybe he just really wanted to look cool on our first date. He spotted me and waved, a grin spreading across his face. I waved back, trying to suppress my nerves and failing miserably. The initial small talk was standard. "How was your day? Where are you from? What do you do?" But something felt off. His laugh was a little too loud, his jokes a little too dark. I brushed it off at first, thinking he was just trying to be edgy or funny. But as the conversation went on, I started to feel like I was peeling back layers of a personality I wasn't sure I wanted to see. He told me about his last job, how he'd been fired for getting too close to the staff, and how he liked to keep things interesting in his life. My stomach did a weird flip at that, but I laughed it off, hoping it was just a bad joke. We ordered another round, and he suggested we do a little bar hopping after this. I hesitated. It was getting late, and the city can get kind of creepy after dark, but there was something magnetic about Mark that made it hard to say no. Maybe it was the thrill of the unknown, or maybe it was the beer talking. So I nodded and off we went. The second bar was a dive, dark, sticky floors, and a jukebox that seemed to be stuck on a terrible 80s playlist. Mark ordered shots, and I grimaced but downed them anyway. That's when things took a turn. He started talking about his childhood, how he had a rough upbringing. I leaned in, trying to be supportive, but he started to get more animated, his eyes widening, his hands flailing as he recounted tales of getting into fights and running away from home. It felt like he was performing for me, but I wasn't sure if I was an audience or a therapist at that point. Then he casually dropped a bomb about how he had a friend who he claimed was in prison for doing something really bad. The way he said it made me think there was more to the story. I asked about it, and he just laughed it off, saying something cryptic about how everyone deserves a second chance. My skin prickled. I was starting to realize that Mark wasn't just quirky, he was a little unhinged. But he was charming enough to keep me from bolting. I was torn between wanting to know more and wanting to escape. After a couple more drinks, he suggested we take a walk. I hesitated again. It was pitch dark outside, and the streets were eerily quiet. But I didn't want to seem rude or overly cautious. It felt like I was in a movie, and I was the unsuspecting heroine about to get herself into trouble. We stepped outside, and a chill ran through the air. The city felt different at night, less friendly, more foreboding. We wandered down a few blocks, and Mark led me to a park. It was completely deserted, illuminated only by a flickering street lamp that cast long, creepy shadows. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it, the glow of the flame illuminating his face in a way that made him look almost sinister. I could feel my heart racing as he took a drag, his eyes narrowing like he was concocting some grand scheme. "You know," he said, "this is where I like to come to think. It's peaceful. You can hear yourself." He turned to me, a look of intensity on his face. "You know, sometimes I think about what it would be like to disappear. Just vanish." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as a joke, but Mark's expression didn't change. "I mean it," he said. "There are places in this world where people just stop existing. You could be anyone you want, do anything you want. There's a freedom in that." I felt my stomach drop. This was not the kind of deep conversation I was prepared for on a first date. I started looking for an exit strategy, but we were far from the bar, and I didn't want to walk back alone. Then he did something unexpected. He grabbed my arm and pulled me closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I could show you what that feels like. Just for a little while, my heart raced, and I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood, but his grip tightened. I could see the glint in his eyes, something wild and unhinged. I was frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Suddenly, he released me, stepping back like he was realizing he'd crossed a line. "Sorry," he said, suddenly sounding apologetic. "I didn't mean to scare you." I forced a smile, not sure what to say. I wanted to run, but I didn't want to seem rude. I just needed to get out of there. "Hey, maybe we should head back," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's getting late." He frowned, and I could see a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but he nodded, and we started walking back in silence. The tension hung between us like a thick fog, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something dangerous. When we got back to the bar, I made an excuse about needing to get home early. He offered to walk me to my car, but I declined, insisting I was fine. I could see the disappointment in his eyes again, but I didn't care. I practically sprinted to my car, my heart racing. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of him standing alone under the flickering street lamp, smoke curling around him like a ghost. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again, and honestly, I didn't want to. But something about that night stuck with me, the feeling that I had brushed up against something dark and unsettling. I didn't sleep well that night, and I still think about it sometimes, that strange mixture of charm and chaos in a guy I barely knew. I guess some first dates lead to laughs and butterflies, while others just lead to running for your life.